In his recent speech, Trump outlined a plan he described as the largest deportation program in American history. His approach would use the Alien Enemies Act of 1798 to rapidly deport undocumented immigrants, focusing on individuals that he associates with criminal activity. And we know from day one, he's associated all immigrants with criminal activity, saying that they're rapists and criminals and murderers, and some of them are good people. And Trump stated, on day one, I will launch the largest deportation program in American history. I will invoke the Alien Enemies Act of 1798. This is something that he actually said at his recent rally. And so with language like this, it can be kind of alarming, especially as an immigration attorney. And today we're going to talk about some of these statements that concern me as, frankly, an immigration attorney and also a human being. History hasn't been kind to the ways that we have treated immigrants in the past, especially when we invoke or use sweeping laws like this. And so that's why we're going to dive into this topic and discuss it today. Let's talk about the Alien Enemies Act of 1798. So originally, this was a law that was created to control enemy nationals during wartime. It's not there to do mass deportations or to round up civilians and cause their deportation. So there's this idea out there that this will lead to legal challenges. Now, we did see during the 2020 election that many Trump-appointed judges did not go along with claims of election fraud. And in fact, the Trump party and his campaign, they did not win a single one of their election fraud cases, right? All of them were shut down, even the ones presided over by Trump-appointed judges. But what's interesting is on a subject like this, there might be a little more willingness to just kind of go along with it. And so even though there would be a lot of legal challenges to, Trump invoking this kind of law, I could see a lot of courts, frankly, side with him. We just saw the Supreme Court, and as we all know, Trump appointed 3 of those justices. We just saw the Supreme Court side with, striking a number of voters from Virginia voting records, which surprised me. I thought, well, there's no way they're going to do anything with that. Now, in Virginia, there is same-day voter registration. So if you're one of those people that's being purged from the rolls and it's election day and you go to vote and for some reason you can't, you can re-register same day, you can vote. Okay, so I want to make sure everybody knows that. But to me, it is a little bit alarming that Trump, together with the help of a Republican Senate and Mitch McConnell, they put a lot of judges on the bench, and a lot of those judges might be favorable to him using, a 200-ish more year-old law to do some of these things. And that can be concerning. But what does it mean? There's been talk of internment camps and those kinds of things. And, people might say, well, that's alarmist. That's not actually going to happen. I don't think any Americans really want that to happen. Some might. But the reality is bad things have happened before. If we look at family separation that happened, they used a law that wasn't traditionally counted against parents to then claim that they were criminal violators, and then they separated children from parents at the border. And today, there's more than 100, but I think less than 200 children who've been separated from their parents, and this is almost 8 years ago now, and never been reunited with them. And that's the case. So to say, well, this is overblown, these concerns, this isn't actually going to happen, there's a chance that it might, okay? There's a chance that we have, internment camps if he invokes this law and they start to act on it. And then would courts even be fast enough to stop some terrible things from happening? So there are a lot of concerns out there generally that I have when somebody uses the kind of language that they've been using like Trump has. One of the things that I foresee, if this act is invoked and these things start to happen, I'm not sure that you're going to ever be able to truly deport. It's somewhere between 11 million and maybe 20 million people. And you might be thinking, gosh, that's a lot. Why don't we know the specific numbers? Those kinds of things. There have been efforts not to count these people in censuses and things. And so that's one of the reasons we don't know the numbers. And then also, frankly, the U.S. immigration system is just simply overloaded. So that's another reason that we don't know these things. But so somewhere between 11 million and 20 million people, it's just impossible. And so when you consider, first of all, the kind of effort that it would take, we're going to talk about financial resources in a bit. It's literally impossible to find every single person and deport them forcibly, right? Because presumably these people have lives here. In fact, for a fact, I know many of them have lives here, and they don't want to go. Many of them have lived here for decades. There are people without legal status in the U.S. who have been here for a very long time. This is home, right? When we think about DACA kids, this is home. And so, yeah, so many of them don't even remember their own countries. This is the only country they know and remember and love, frankly. I know many DACA children who are now adults who are very patriotic. And so the idea that we would even invoke the, you know, Alien Insurrection Act, Alien Enemies Act of 1798, and deport and remove these people is nuts to me. But the idea, it's impossible to gather them all up. So what actually happens? Well, I think that it is possible that we have some kinds of internment camps or some means of gathering people together, right? Resources will begin to be expended on this, whether it's harebrained or whether they start half-cocked or not, fully planned or not. There's a chance that some things begin to start rolling before a judge can come in with a temporary restraining order. And so, and then let's assume that a judge, maybe there is a temporary restraining order, but ultimately it's allowed to move forward. Let's just assume the worst for a second. Even in the worst case scenario, I don't think you get everybody because it's just so many people, right? How much would it cost to deport 20 million people? So some estimates put it at about $200 billion, okay? And then conversely, that's just the enforcement costs. We've got to pay people. We've got to build detention centers. You have to have guards at an internment camp, right? You have to have guards at a detention facility. Are you going to round up people as families? Are you going to separate mothers and fathers from children? Or are there going to be family detention centers? Like, what are the logistics of this and what does it look like? So he's saying that he's going to invoke this more than 200-year-old law to do these things. What does that mean? Of course, there haven't been vast policy proposals, but it's concerning, right? How does this happen? So there's an enforcement cost, but there's also an economic cost. And this is the thing that worries me is what is it going to do to the US economy? Let's say, right, again, we've taken that number, 11 to 20 million people. We don't exactly know how many undocumented immigrants are here. But let's say you take 20 million people and remove them from the US. So imagine not at the scale of half of everybody, but let's say it's less than 10%. It's about 7.5%. Let's say 7 out of every 100 people you know disappear from our economy, right? That's crazy to think about. And so what impact does that have? How many restaurants shut down? How many buildings go unbuilt? How many crops go unpicked? How many doctors don't get to service children? Now, I know that we don't have a lot of undocumented immigrant doctors, but we do have a lot of people that are the support system for a lot of these services that are out there. And if they disappear, it ruins our economy. So we're going to spend an extra $200 billion on this, right? Almost $250 billion to enforce this. And then we're going to wipe out $200 billion of our economy as well, right? Like, it seems insane to move to mass deport. The answer is what Reagan did, which is amnesty. Everybody knows it, and they just keep hemming and hawing about border security and this, that, and the other. Sure, that's great. We need to make sure that the border is more safe. But we need to remember that the last time we took a good hard look at our immigration system and its limits was last millennium, right? In the 90s. We haven't really done an overhaul. And so the demands, the number of people trying to get into our country, we haven't adjusted those numbers in the way that we've needed to for a very long time. And so to blame this on, border security is not an accurate picture. And to begin to invoke these kinds of laws and say, well, we're just going to delete 7% of the US population because they are part of the US population. They're undocumented immigrants, but they're here and they're providing services and they're in our schools and they're in our economy. They are helping our economy. A lot of the information out there suggests that the reason the US economy has bounced back from COVID more than any other developed nation is because of the influx of immigrants, many of whom don't have status in the US. And so to just remove them is to go backwards. It seems excessively unwise. It seems very expensive. both in terms of enforcement costs and very expensive in terms of the bill we get at the back end when we lose out a huge portion of our economy. Now, a lot of people who I talk to say, well, it'll never get to that point. Like Trump's not saying he wants to actually deport 20 million people. They'll say those are the words he's using, but we know that he speaks in hyperbole. That's something that I've heard before. I've seen it from pundits on TV. I've heard it from friends and others who I talk to about these topics. And they'll say, well, nobody wants that to happen. And Trump, he might be using those words, but like, we know that it'll be watered down, that kind of thing. We don't know that. Okay. I'll give you some perspective about how you would think that some policies would be applied intellectually and with heart on a case-by-case basis, but have not been. So here's one example. A lot of people are familiar with this. In the criminal law context, if somebody does something wrong, they get brought into court. They get to launch a criminal defense. But very frequently, cases just end in a plea deal, which is where the prosecutor offers, well, hey, look, we can get rid of any jail time. We just need an apology and we need some community service. We need to pay a fine, that kind of thing. Or we can do jail on weekends, right? Like we can work with this person so they can hold down a job, support their family, those kinds of things. And so you can get a plea deal in the criminal context and kind of preserve some autonomy for these people so that we don't remove them from the community. We don't remove them from their families, those kinds of things. Likewise, in the immigration context, in immigration court, prosecutors, government attorneys, they're not called prosecutors, they're government attorneys. They work for the Department of Homeland Security. They have the option to provide essentially plea deals to many immigrants. And we'll say, well, look, you're not an enforcement priority. You haven't committed any crimes. You've been here a decade. There's really no reason to deport you. You have a U.S. citizen child, and while you have no path to legal status, you're not harming anybody. So we have limited enforcement resources. So we're just not going to deport you, okay? So we'll close out your case. We're not going to give you legal status, but we're also not going to deport you. So this is something that happens frequently. And when we have a client who doesn't have a particularly strong case for like asylum or other issues, then we might recommend, hey, accept this deal. It's called prosecutorial discretion, right? So it's this idea that the person prosecuting the case, the government attorney, can exercise some discretion. This was very common in the Obama era. And during Trump's first term, we approached DHS and quickly learned that they were not willing to extend PD in any case ever, right? Okay, fine. Now you're thinking, okay, but surely they wouldn't take it to the extreme. So we had a family with a child who had a heart condition. And we even got a letter from a doctor in the US that says this child is being treated for this heart condition in the US. And in their home country, this treatment is not available. If you deport this child, they will die. It's not a question of when, or it's not a question of if, but when. And so you cannot deport this child, right? Now we went and asked for prosecutorial discretion. Hey, look, this is a very special case. This isn't like, oh, they have ties to the US and that kind of thing. This child will die if they don't stay in the US. Can we please get PD in this particular case? And the answer was no. They were not allowed to extend any kind of discretion at all. And so to say, oh, well, he's saying he's going to deport 20 million people, that doesn't mean it, to me, that just feels false, right? Like we should take these things at their word, and then we should plan for them and ask ourselves the reasonable questions that spawn from that. Like, what does this look like? And I would hazard to guess that if we really break it down and think about what that looks like, this is not a future that we want. It's not a future that I want. Now, this is not necessarily a political YouTube channel. That's not what I'm saying. We are going over the immigration plans and talking about what they look like. But we absolutely advocate on behalf of our clients. And the plan, just the idea that this is even being proposed, would hurt so many of the people that we know and love, and that you know and love in your community, that provide services for you, that help you. Doing this would invariably hurt so many people and would not be good for the United States. Now, let's talk about the impact that this plan would have on families, communities, and children. So if we're going to invoke this Alien Act of 1798. We're going to round up and deport every single undocumented immigrant. What happens to the families? What happens to the U.S. citizen-born children of these parents? Now, I've heard the rhetoric, and so have you, and Trump has expressed multiple times that the children of immigrants present in the U.S. should not automatically receive citizenship. Now, that's the way it currently is. If you're an immigrant and you come to the U.S. and you have a baby, your child is a U.S. citizen if they were born here, right? I'm in favor of that. I think that's the way it should continue to be. And then we have additional citizenship laws that make it so that if your child is born elsewhere, but you're a citizen, then they're also a citizen, those kinds of things. It can get very specific, very granular. And so, if you're having a child outside of the U.S. and you want to make sure they're a citizen, maybe talk to a lawyer about it. Now, these children are U.S. citizens. They speak English. They attend school. Some of them, when they get older, they're teenagers, they have jobs. Some of them are adults, they have jobs. But let's talk about children in elementary schools. We're going to take their parents away from them. What do we do with the children? Do we deport U.S. citizen children together with their parents? Or do we take those children? We don't have orphanages in the U.S., so do we put them in our foster care system? What do we do with U.S. citizen-born children of undocumented parents? Now, I haven't heard a policy proposal. And sure, again, Trump will say, oh, we're focusing on criminals. But, that's, again, when he first came down the escalator and said they're rapists and some of them are good people, right? So the vast majority of them, he's saying that he will get out, right? And again, people will tell me, well, you're taking it to an extreme. It's not like that. I can tell you as a practicing immigration attorney, what I have experienced has been pretty extreme when we're not going to extend discretion to people who will die if we deport them. And then we choose to enter deportation orders against them anyways. This is a problem. That is the extreme. And so I have seen things go to the extreme. And so this worries me. And so you have to think about, okay, well, what's the logical policy proposal if we're going to deport everybody? What do we do with these children? Now, obviously there's an impact on these children. Okay, I understand that. But then also, what's the impact on our communities? Let's say we have to have several million children go into the foster system, right? What does that look like? How does that impact other families? How does that impact budgets at the state and federal level for these kinds of programs? I don't think that this is a well thought out policy proposal. Now, again, you might then say, well, then that's because it's just never going to happen. But we can't bank on that because during Trump's first term, we saw a number of things happen that were exceptionally harmful to the fabric of our community, to families, to immigrants, and the United States as a whole through our immigration system that maybe you didn't notice directly because you don't practice immigration law or you're not an immigrant. But there's real cause for concern here. So another statement that Trump made is that he's going to end the migrant invasion. And he talks a lot about criminal immigrants and those kinds of things. So if you're watching this on YouTube, which is where you're going to be watching it, pause for a minute. Go look up crime rates and look up crime rates of immigrant populations in particular. You're going to discover something very interesting, that immigrants commit crime at a lower rate than average U.S. citizens. Okay, so it's a falsehood that all immigrants are out there committing crimes. Now, what about those who are committing crimes? Can't we focus on them? Yes, and we currently do. And here's an interesting note, just to compare the Biden administration and the Obama administration to the Trump administration. The Obama administration and Biden administrations per term, per 4-year period, deport more people than Trump did under his 4 years, okay? And the reason is that prosecutorial discretion, okay? They're not wasting time on children who have heart conditions that would cause them to die if they were being deported, right? They'll just close those cases out because of prosecutorial discretion. And then they can spend their limited enforcement money, unless we're going to fund it to the tune of $200 billion, they're going to spend their limited resources and focus on those who have criminal histories. That's what the Biden administration is already doing, okay? And that's why the Biden administration has deported more people than Trump ever did already, okay? And it's interesting to look at that and consider and go, Oh, okay. And so a lot of us, when I talk to people, they're like, well, I don't think criminal immigrants should be allowed to stay. And my response is, they generally aren't, right? Like the current administration, it's not, it's not, it's not like the Democrats are like, oh, we want the criminals, right? Like that's not what it is. And they're not just letting them across the border either. That's just not the reality or the America we live in. Um, but this idea that we're just letting in now, look, there are gangs, there are criminal organizations, and some of them have former members or members who have come and immigrated into the United States. And of course, we have to deal with that. We have to make sure that it's safe. But our laws already allow us to remove people who are causing problems with safety in the United States. Like our laws permit that. We don't have to invoke an alien act from 1798 and mass deport 20 million people, spend huge, vast sums of money on enforcement efforts, and damage our economy in the process. There is a middle ground. And frankly, we're already doing that middle ground by focusing our enforcement efforts on those with criminal histories. And you know, the Biden administration isn't getting credit for that. But yeah, I mean, Biden and Obama have deported more people than Trump. And if you look, so like I said, stop for a minute, Google this, and you will find that that's true. You will find that, you know, if safety is one of your concerns and safety about crimes that immigrants are committing is one of your concerns, then the Trump presidency and Trump immigration strategies are not what you're looking for because they didn't work last time. And if we're doubling down and doing more of the same, they're not going to work this time either. So when we talk about Trump using this kind of language and then saying, I'm going to invoke the Alien Enemies Act of 1798, I'm going to invoke this, and we're going to deport all of the immigrants, 11 million to 20 million, however many it is, this is a problem. It's going to be costly and expensive. It's going to damage our communities. It's going to damage our country. It's going to hurt our economy. This is a bad policy proposal. It's just bad. It's unhumanitarian, it's anti-economy, and again, this is something that I hear a lot of people say, well, he doesn't actually mean that, it won't be so bad, those kinds of things. But as someone who has worked with it, we know that it can get pretty bad. I remember family separation and meeting with and talking with families that had to deal with the aftermath of being forcibly separated from their children and their children from their parents. I remember talking to young girls and mothers who can't get prosecutorial discretion and get that plea deal in immigration court to close out proceedings in what should be a very reasonable and easily understood accommodation, right? And so I have seen how extreme it can get, and it worries me when we don't understand or consider that it might very well be that extreme. Thank you for watching this video. This is a very sobering look at a policy proposal. And you might look at it and say, well, that's not a policy proposal. It's just Trump being Trump. But having lived through the first Trump administration as an immigration attorney and dealt with some of the aftermath and helping my clients deal with some of these immigration issues, I know that these things can move quickly and they can have an impact on a lot of people's lives, whether they're fully realized or not. So this is an important video. I hope that you realize that it's good information. If you like what you heard and you'd want to learn more about us and the work we do with immigrants here in the United States, subscribe to our channel, share this video, and we'll be seeing you here at the Tension Law YouTube channel. Thank you so much for listening and watching, and you have a good day.